Excuse me. Do you know who I am? The voice was volcanic, slicing through the hushed ambience of La Marie, one of the most exclusive fine dining establishments in the city. Wine glasses trembled, forks paused mid-bite, and conversations died on expensive lips. Every head in the room turned toward the spectacle unraveling in the center of the dining room. Standing, red-faced and puffed with indignation, was Victor Langston, the billionaire real estate tycoon known as much for his towering skyscrapers as for his even taller ego. A man who rarely heard the word no, and even less frequently encountered silence. His voice boomed again, this time aimed directly at the young black waitress standing a few feet away. "I've been sitting here for 2 minutes," Victor shouted, "and there's no wine. No water. Not even a hello. Do you treat all your customers this way, or just the important ones?" The waitress, Danielle, stood still. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with a calm presence that felt almost unnatural in the chaos he was causing. Her uniform was crisp, her posture straight, and her eyes clear, but there was something behind them. Something that didn't shrink beneath the weight of power. "I expect excellence," Victor barked. "I don't pay thousands to be ignored like I'm some nobody." The maitre d', a slim man named Antoine, hovered nearby, frozen in silent horror. He was trained for demanding guests, but Victor Langston was in a league of his own, a walking headline, a Yelp disaster waiting to happen. Antoine shot Danielle a glance, begging her to de-escalate. Danielle didn't look back at Antoine. Instead, she calmly walked forward. 1 step, then 2. Her shoes made no sound against the marble floor, but her presence grew louder with each pace. By the time she stopped in front of Victor's table, the entire restaurant had fallen into a dense, watchful silence. "The kind you feel more than here." Victor smirked, assuming she had finally come to apologize. Maybe offer him a complimentary bottle. Maybe grovel. He liked when people groveled. But instead, Danielle leaned in just enough for her words to be heard by everyone within 20 feet. And then she said it. "I used to own this place." The words didn't shout. They didn't need to. They were a whisper wrapped in steel. A sentence so calm, so unexpected, it hit harder than any scream. Every sound vanished from the room. Even Victor's breath seemed to catch in his throat. He blinked. What did you just say?" Danielle didn't flinch. Her hands stayed steady, still holding the leather-bound notepad she'd been carrying when the tirade started. The maitre d' looked like he had seen a ghost. The guest stared, now riveted, leaning forward, not to see Victor anymore, but her. Something was shifting, and it started with one sentence. Victor Langston's lips twitched. At first, it was almost amusement. Surely, she was joking. Delusional. Making some kind of dramatic point. "You?" he repeated, half laughing. "You used to own La Marie?" He leaned back in his velvet chair, arms crossed. The amusement in his voice dripped with condescension. "That's the funniest thing I've heard all year." But Danielle didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and spoke evenly, her voice calm, her words deliberate. "My grandfather, Charles Dupree, built this restaurant. He laid the bricks with his own hands, poured the foundation himself. He was a black man who came from nothing, saved every dollar, and created a place where people could feel both luxury and soul. This place was his dream." The gasp started again, soft, but audible. Danielle continued. "When he passed away, my mother took over. She was proud, determined. But business got hard. The neighborhood changed. The taxes went up. Then came the bank, and the lawyers, and the letters with words like default and foreclosure. They said she missed one payment. Just one." Victor's expression tightened. Danielle stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "We tried to fight it, but the auction came fast. Everything happened in weeks. We barely had time to clear out the photos." Her voice dropped a little, just enough to make people lean in closer. "You bought it," she said, locking eyes with Victor. "At the auction, for a fraction of what it cost to build. You didn't know who built it. You didn't care. You just saw an opportunity. You gutted the place, changed the menu, turned it into a trophy." Victor swallowed hard, his smug grin now completely gone. "And now," she added, standing tall, "I'm serving wine in the place my family created, waiting tables for the man who erased our name from the walls." There was a long, weighty pause, one that pressed down on everyone in the room. Victor opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He looked around, at the diners watching with quiet intensity, at the maitre d' who had turned pale, at the nearby waiter frozen mid-pour. This wasn't a private embarrassment. This was a reckoning. Someone at a corner table whispered to their partner, "She's serious." I remember hearing about the Dupree family. This place used to be called Maison Dupree before the rebranding. Danielle didn't need to defend herself further. The truth had already taken root. The power in the room was shifting, not because she raised her voice, but because she didn't. In just a few minutes, Danielle had turned from a lowly waitress into the center of the room's gravity. And the man who owned the building? He suddenly looked very, very small. Victor Langston sat back slowly in his chair. The boldness in his face had drained, replaced by something he hadn't shown in years, discomfort. I had no idea, he muttered. His voice was quiet now. For once, the mighty Victor Langston didn't want to be heard. Danielle didn't flinch. Her expression stayed neutral, not smug, not angry. Just tired. Tired of pretending that people like Victor couldn't be held accountable. Tired of swallowing history just to keep her job. "No," she replied simply. "You wouldn't know." There was no venom in her tone, just clarity. She continued, "Because people like me, we don't usually get to tell our stories. Not in places like this. We're just supposed to smile, nod, and refill the glasses while billionaires yell at us for being 5 minutes late with water." The silence stretched, not awkward, but powerful. It was the kind of silence that filled a room with thought. A woman at a nearby table, dressed in an elegant navy dress, began clapping slowly. Softly. Once, then twice. Another diner joined in. A man in his 60s with a shock of white hair and a designer watch. Soon a third. And within seconds, the room erupted into a slow, respectful applause. Not the wild kind you hear at concerts, but the measured kind. The kind that says, "We heard you. We saw what just happened. And we're with you." Victor didn't know where to look. He, the man who commanded attention wherever he went, had lost it completely. No one was watching him anymore. Their eyes were on Danielle. Antoine, the maitre d', stepped forward nervously, as if to break the tension or offer her a way out. But Danielle turned calmly and began walking back toward the kitchen, shoulders square, head high. She didn't bow. She didn't wave. She just left the room the same way she had entered it, quietly, professionally, and with dignity. And somehow, that made it even more powerful. Victor sat in stunned silence. His fingers drummed once against the tablecloth, then stopped. The linen looked whiter than usual. Or maybe he just felt smaller next to it. From another corner, a young couple whispered to each other, "Did you know about the restaurant's history?" I had no idea. I thought it was always Langston owned. People were already Googling Maison Dupree, under the table, reading about its roots, discovering newspaper clippings from the early 2000s, charity dinners the Dupree family used to host, and photos of Danielle's grandfather shaking hands with the city's first black mayor. A waitress had spoken truth to power, and the room had turned with her. That night, La Marie didn't serve just foie gras and caviar. It served a reminder that real class isn't in the wallet. It's in the courage to speak and the grace to listen. Back in the kitchen, the atmosphere was buzzing, not with orders or tickets, but with whispers. Chefs paused their chopping. Line cooks exchanged glances. Even the dishwasher poked his head out, curiosity written across his face. Danielle, however, walked in like nothing had happened. She didn't slam anything down. She didn't burst into tears. She just grabbed a clean towel, wiped her hands, and went back to refilling the water pitchers. The head chef, a burly man named Marco who had worked in kitchens for over 30 years, approached her with a mixture of concern and awe. "You okay?" he asked, voice low, as though careful not to disturb the quiet pride in the room. Danielle nodded. "Yeah, I didn't mean to make a scene. I just couldn't stay silent anymore." Marco didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, really looked. For months, he'd noticed something different about her. The way she moved. The way she paid attention to every plate before it left the line. The way she never raised her voice, but always got things done. "I always thought there was something different about you," he finally said. "You carry yourself like someone who owns more than just an apron." Danielle smiled faintly, but said nothing. Because Marco was right. That night, after her shift ended, Danielle changed out of her uniform, pulled on a hoodie, and walked the 6 blocks to her tiny studio apartment. It was small, barely enough space for her books and mattress, but it was hers. She flicked on the single desk lamp, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick black folder. Inside were architectural blueprints, aged paper with faded ink and smudged fingerprints, diagrams of dining rooms, bar areas, kitchen layouts. Some were original sketches her grandfather had made on napkins. Others were her own revisions, modern, sleek, but still warm. At the back of the folder was her vision board, color swatches, menu mock-ups, inspirational quotes. At the top of the page, in handwritten cursive, were the words, Maison Dupree, reclaimed. Danielle wasn't just a waitress. She had been studying hospitality management at night, online classes, textbooks with yellow highlights, Zoom lectures during her 15-minute breaks. She had taken out no loans, only used the cash she'd saved from tips and overtime. She had goals, big ones. She didn't want to work under someone forever, especially not in a building her family had lost. She wanted to rebuild, not just a restaurant, a legacy. And tonight, for the first time in years, she had allowed herself to speak like someone who believed that dream was still possible. She had looked a billionaire in the eye and reminded him that history doesn't disappear just because the signage changes. Sometimes, it walks right back in, wearing a server's apron and carrying a tray of truth. It was 1 week later. Danielle had just clocked in for her evening shift, tying her apron with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. The attention from the incident had died down a bit, though a few diners still whispered when they saw her. Some even asked for her section specifically. Still, Danielle stayed focused. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol or a viral video. She just wanted to do her job, save her money, and follow the quiet plan she'd built one tip jar at a time. She didn't expect the man in the sleek black suit who walked into the restaurant at 6:43 p.m. He didn't ask to be seated. He didn't take off his sunglasses. He walked straight to the maitre d' and handed him an envelope. "For Ms. Danielle Dupree," he said, before disappearing out the door without another word. Antoine turned to Danielle and handed her the envelope with raised eyebrows. "Special delivery for you," he said, half joking. "You got secret admirers now?" Danielle frowned. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with gold edges. Her name was handwritten in careful script on the front. Inside was a letter, on heavy, embossed stationery that smelled faintly of cologne and wealth. It read, "Danielle, I owe you an apology, not just for yelling, but for never knowing the story of the place I bought, or the people who made it great. You reminded me that wealth means nothing without respect, and that some legacies are more valuable than anything on a balance sheet. I've created a restoration fund in your family's name. It's enough to help you build what was taken, this time on your terms. Victor Langston." Danielle's hands trembled slightly as she pulled out the check behind the letter. It had more zeros than she'd ever seen in her life. Enough to buy a building. Enough to start a restaurant. Enough to reclaim Maison Dupree. She sat down at a back table, her heart racing. It wasn't just the money. It was the fact that someone who once treated her like nothing had chosen to see her, to listen, to give back. Tears pricked at her eyes, not from gratitude, but from validation. She thought about her grandfather and mother, about the long nights, the textbooks, the plans scribbled on food receipts, about the courage it took to speak one sentence in a room full of power. She folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and smiled. She would start again, not from scratch, but from strength, from history, from truth. And next time she walked into a restaurant, it wouldn't be to serve food. It would be to welcome guests, to a place rebuilt not just in memory, but in triumph. Because one sentence really can change everything.